Hello and welcome to this edition of Stats Chats. Today we are going to talk about correlations. Correlations are statistical analyses that look at the strength of relationship or magnitude of relationship between two variables. One of the most common statistical tests we use for correlation is the Pearson's R, or the Pearson's product moment correlation coefficient. For the more formal name. It's often shortened to Pearson's R. We can also use a Spearman row, but for this tutorial we'll look at the Pearson's R. So we'll be using the same data set we've used for other analyses, looking at a real data set of empathy data from a workshop conducted with therapists in training to enhance empathy levels, self-compassion, self-kindness, and emotional intelligence. So when we open SPSS and open our data set, we go to Analyze, and then we go to Correlate. And when we mouse over Correlate, another drop-down menu appears, and then we select Bivariate. Then a pop-up box appears for bivariate correlations. Right now I have selected two variables, post-ECR anxiety. So if you haven't done one of these lately, your variables will be blank and you can select your variable. And once you have it selected, you just click on what you want to select. You click on the arrow and move it over. So we'll stick with trait emotional intelligence and post attachment related anxiety. We want to make sure that Pearson is selected for the correlation coefficient. And you can select show only the lower triangle or not. I'll do that because that helps me get closer to an APA style results table, so fewer modifications to format things in APA. So then I click OK, and then SPSS runs this process, and then we have our SPSS output here. So you can see here at the bottom there's descriptive statistics, and then there's correlation. So we look at the significance level, 0.006. We see two asterisks, and below the table you can see that the two asterisks represent the idea that the correlation is significant at the 0.01 level on a two-tailed test. So we could say that there is a statistically significant correlation between attachment-related anxiety and trait emotional intelligence. So as emotional intelligence tends to increase, attachment-related anxiety tends to decrease. So we see a negative sign on this correlation, which means there's a negative or inverse correlation. And as far as the strength of correlation, there's some different interpretations with respect to what's considered a strong correlation, a moderate correlation, a weak correlation, and little to no correlation. I'll share with you the guide that I like to use, and this is adapted from Hinkle and colleagues 2003 text, Applied Statistics for the Behavioral Sciences. And they indicate that if you have a correlation between 0.9 and 1, or alternatively negative 0.9 and 1, that's considered a very high positive correlation. So if you have a correlation between 0.5 and 0.7, that's considered a moderate correlation. And again, the sign, if it's a negative, it's going to be moderate, positive, negative correlation. If there's no sign, or if there's a positive sign, it's going to be a positive correlation. So that sign tells us the direction of the correlation. So if it's between 0.3 and 0.5, that's going to be a low correlation. So if we go back to our SPSS output, we see our correlation was 0.389. So that's actually considered low. It is statistically significant though. So there's a statistically significant low correlation between attachment-related anxiety and trait emotional intelligence. So that's interesting to see. We could also do a scatter plot to see what this looks like. So to conduct a scatter plot, we want to go to graphs, and then you see this drop-down menu, and at the bottom there's an option called legacy dialogues. We click on legacy dialogues, and then we can go down to the second to last option, scatter plot, and we click on that, simple scatter, and click on define. And then let's see, I recently looked at some other variables, so let's look at our current variables, we were looking at post, attachment related anxiety. So I'll move that over. And then we're looking at post, trait, emotional intelligence total, I believe. So we'll move that over and then we'll click OK here. And then you can see the scatter plot. Now we can double click here and click on this icon, and it gives us this line of best fit, the regression equation here for the line, and we can see this the direction of this correlation kind of going in that negative direction. We can see the slope here, and so that gives us an idea of what this data set looks like. Then we want to make sure that we report our results of the correlation in APA style. So what we would do is, look at our outcome data to get the values that we need. So we want to know, things like what are our descriptive statistics. We want to know our sample size, our N value, our significance level, and then our Pearson's correlation. So those are the things we're going to look at. Let me open the PowerPoint and show you an example. So if you think about a checklist, we want to provide the R, the Pearson's value, the statistical significance, the sample size, and we also have to interpret, right, based on the slide I was showing you about the strength of a relationship, right? We concluded that this was a weaker relationship. So you can plug your variables in here. So we might say the relationship between, instead of self-kindness, the relationship between emotional intelligence and attachment-related anxiety, measured by the experiences in close relationships questionnaire, is assessed through Pearson's product moment correlation coefficient. That's usually just shortened to Pearson's R, but the first time you're seeing it's helpful to know the full formal name of the statistical test. So this is assessed through Pearson's R. There was we would say for our case, weak, positive, or inverse, because there's negative sign, weak, negative correlation between self-kindness and emotionality is what our variables were different. So we'd plug in our variables for self-kindness and emotionality, which were trait, emotional intelligence, and attachment-related anxiety, I believe. And then we'd plug in our R value, our N value, and our P value. So if we go back to SPSS, we can find our R, Pearson's R, negative 0.389, our P value 0.006, and our N value 49. So everything we need to report our results is right here in this little correlation table. And that is then the next task of the researcher is to make sense of this information. So we might have anticipated actually a stronger, this is a statistically significant inverse correlation, but we might have thought it would be stronger, that maybe emotional intelligence would be able to more strongly correlate with attachment-related anxiety. So then we want to maybe look at the other literature and what does it say about the connection between emotional intelligence and attachment, and how might we make sense of these variables. And many times when we're doing research, our research and our findings lead us to more questions. That's why most articles have that section called recommendations for further research. So thank you for watching this episode of Stats Chats. I hope this gives you some concepts to contemplate and helps you as you do correlation analyses. One last thing to mention is that you can also look at the regression equation here, and you can plug numbers into this equation to see what you would get for y at a given value of x. And that's just going back to mathematics, where we're doing the mathematical formula and plugging the values in to see what we get. So there is some error involved, but if we were going to do a prediction, this would be our line of best fit between these two variables. Thank you again for watching, and God bless your work. And until next time, I hope this gives you some concepts to contemplate. Bye now.